Hello and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. So my promise to you is that I will bring you the most interesting people doing the most interesting things and have the most interesting conversations with them. And today's guest is no exception to that rule. I have known Brad Meltzer since we were in high school together. And Brad is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Heroes for My Son, Heroes for My Daughter, a dozen suspense novels like The Escape Artist, and nonfiction books like The First Conspiracy. He's also the host of the History Channel television shows Brad Meltzer's Decoded, which my kids loved, and Brad Meltzer's Lost History, which he used to find the 9/11 flag. He's the co-creator of Xavier Riddle and the Secret Museum, and of course, that's been the inspiration for Brad. He lives in Florida with his wife and their 3 children. And Brad, welcome to the show.
Oh, I love being here. This is it. Welcome back to Florida.
Yes, thank you. I'm sad that I picked a cloudy day, it sounds like, to be there.
You did pick a cloudy day. Yeah, but everyone's going to feel screwed over when we have nice weather in like 3 months.
That is true. That is true. You know, people always ask me how I like living in Boston, and I'm like, well, I like it in July.
Yes,
Don't
it's great
like
in
it
July.
March.
The summer's great. Fall's great. It's gray until it's May. I live there. We miss you. Anyway, yes, you got a cloudy day here, but hopefully we'll get a nice one for you.
Okay, so let's talk about, being there, right? The idea of like being in the room. So you and I, we sort of loosely knew each other in high school. You went to the opposing high school. Your public high school was way better than my high school. I escaped with, a piece of paper. I think you escaped with a degree. I don't think either one of us were great students. But
let's also be clear. I lived in a worse neighborhood than you lived in. The only thing that my parents did better is they gave a fake address so I could go to my fancy high school. So I wasn't even supposed to go to your high school, which would have been even better. That would have been great for me. I was supposed to go to an even rougher one, but my parents were like, let's use a fake address. And my report cards never came home for 4 years. So that was also fantastic.
I wish my report cards never came home for 4 years, given what my report cards looked like. So you actually moved to Miami from Brooklyn when you were a kid. I think your family had like $1,000 to their name.
It was $1,200. That was it. My dad lost his job at 39 years old and said, we're going to have the do-over of life. Start from nothing, truly nothing. And it was one of those moments where you're not just scared about money, you're scared about your safety. Like, we didn't know where we were going to live. He had no job. He had no plans. It was a disaster.
And you come to Miami, you get a pretty good education. You meet the girl of your dreams.
I did do that. Yes, I did meet the reason I met my wife in junior high school, although I didn't know it at the time. But yes, that one went my way.
Big time. And then you and I actually end up working for the same guy several years later. So yes. I dropped out of law school to join the Clinton campaign because I heard him talk about this idea of AmeriCorps. But before he won the White House, some guy ran his campaign for him. So I'd love for you to tell that story, because I've heard
so let's talk
bits and pieces. But let's talk about Eli Segal.
So that is only the thing I wanted to do today, is talk about Eli Segal. So, and this goes back to high school. One of my best friends in high school, a guy named Matt Oshinsky, I used to sell. I needed to always be hustling to make money, because I just was, the only way I could have a summer internship is I needed to make the money. The only way I could do anything is I had to make the money myself. And I made the first ever bootleg Simpsons t-shirts that were ever made. Truly, the week the show came out, we made them. We literally videotaped the screen and we're pausing it so we knew how to draw the Simpsons. And I know it seems so obvious now that everyone loves the Simpsons, but at episode 1, because we had seen their animation shorts months earlier, we're like, this is going to be big. And we sold 5,000 Simpsons t-shirts in 3 hours. So we made so much money. And now I had to go to the bank, and it was like, I had a Miami driver's license with a stack of cash. So all the bankers thought I was a drug dealer. And I was like, I need to make a deposit right now. But we had sold this amazing, we just made a sale. And I was telling my friend Matt back in Miami, he was going to Yale. And I was like, you should do this at Yale. I'll give you the designs. I'll do it. And his parents see me hustling. And they're like, you hustle. You remind me of our friend Eli Segal. I'm like, who's that? And it winds up being my friend Matt's father, his roommate from college. And I don't know who Eli is, but they're like, you should meet him. He's like you. He's an entrepreneur. He loves different businesses. And I remember going, he had bought Games Magazine at the time, the puzzle and gaming magazine. And I went to the University of Michigan Business School. There was no internet back then to really date us. And Games at the point was owned by Playboy. And Playboy was a public company, so they had annual reports. And I poured through all their annual reports, finding all their sales and their advertising sales and their profits and losses. And I went to, in Harvard Square, I went to visit my now wife and Eli at that en banc right in Cambridge. And
Yes.
I met him there. I never knew who he was. And he sat down just to give me like an internship interview. And I said, here, and I
And he is,
produced all these things.
and he's the most unassuming. He was the most unassuming person ever. He'd walk in and you would have no idea that he was this
Nothing. I mean, that's why he said,
incredibly.
meet me at the local, like, bread place. We'll get sandwiches. I was like, okay, it can't be that fancy. It's across the street from where my, girlfriend goes to school. Great. And I walk in with all this stuff and he's like, where'd you get this? And I'm like, I researched and he's like, you remind me of me. I'm going to give you a job and come work for me. He said, don't go to law school. He said to me, don't go to law school. Wait for a year. And if you love it, you stay, you work for me, and you'll have a great time. He's like, if you hate it, you leave after a year. You got some money in your pocket. So what do you have to lose? I was in college debt. I had to pay off debt. He's like, what do you have to lose? I was like, nothing. I'm going to Boston. And I had an internship with him for the summer. He had hired me back again. But I remember when I first got to working with him, as I was there, this guy, Paul Songas at the time, calls up and says, hey, Eli, will you run my campaign? Like, Paul Songas was like one of the leading guys back then running for the Democrats. Then this guy named Bill Clinton calls up one day and says, will you run my campaign? At which point I'm like, who is Eli Segal? Like, what have I stumbled into in my like stupid Laverne and Shirley way? Like, what chaos have I stumbled into? And I start asking him, and he tells me the story, which my friend's parents had never told me, that Eli was one of the main people in the McGovern campaign. And since the McGovern campaign, he actually, on the McGovern campaign, I should say, hired a young politician, gave him one of his first real jobs named Bill Clinton. And so he was friends with Bill Clinton. He's friends with Paul Songas. He had worked on the Gary Hart campaign and all these other campaigns. And Eli was like the elder statesman at that point. He was no longer in the politics. He was now the businessman who was doing stuff. And I just remember being like, what the hell is going on? Why are these guys calling him? And why do they want my boss to run their campaign when we're all here in Boston? So it was a really amazing wide awake moment for me.
I remember him telling the story later, and he was saying that Bill Clinton called him up and asked to run his campaign. And he's like, well, sure. Remember President McGovern? Remember President Hart? Remember President, like went through all the presidents who did not get elected, right?
He was he was notorious for picking people who lost. And he would joke
Right.
about it. Like, all I could do is pick the people who lose. The thing that was also true at the time, which he was, is also he didn't need to come out of retirement unless it was going to be for someone who was good. Like,
Yes.
why come out to just take another beating? He was smart. And so when Super Tuesday and all those things happened, he was like, wait, there's a winner here. So I remember going and, Eli was like, move your stuff to Boston. Don't go to law school. Come to Boston. It's going to be great. I moved all my stuff to Boston, moved everything to Boston. The week I get to Boston, Eli leaves the job. And I'm like, what did I do? I literally thought I wrecked my life. I was like, I've wrecked my life. My life is over. Like, he's the guy I wanted to work for. I didn't feel like it was right for me to say, hey, can I come with you? I felt like if he wanted to invite me, he would have. So I was working in Boston at the company that was still there. But the reason I went was him, and he was gone. And I spent this entire summer with him. But then when the year started, he was gone, and I thought I wrecked my life. And I remember I was sitting in right across the street, right down the street from where Brookline Booksmith is. And I was in a sports bar of all things. And I was sitting with my girlfriend and I banged the table because I didn't know I'm like, I wrecked my life. So I did, Laura, what all of us would do in situations where we think we wrecked our lives. I literally banged the table. I said, I know what I'm going to do. And my girlfriend said, what? I said, I'm going to write a novel. And she's like, what?
She's like,
I'm like, I was at the
please.
lowest point, right? Like, you wonder how, like, I was like, what? And I was like, I'm going to write a novel. Everyone has one novel in them. And I got a story and I'm going to take my shot. But it was thanks to Eli, who kind of saw my love of writing and was encouraging of it. And I'll pass lots of, and we can go back and talk, but he, helped me find an agent, helped me do all these other things, but never ever left my life. And again, brought me back into the Bill Clinton world later when he won. But it was that moment that I forever owe to him, was my little eureka moment.
That's that is the thing that he does so well. As you know, I worked for him, and then I went to go work for Arnie Miller, who was also involved back in the McGovern campaign. And uh, when I had my moment of rage and I wanted to do it on my own, I started my own business. I actually ran into Eli at like a Kinko's copy shop or something about 5 years into running my business, and he came up to me with the way he like rubbed his hands together all the
Oh, he
time, and
always
always.
fist.
And yeah, and he was like, did you know, he's like, this is, I've been watching you, I've been watching your progress, it's been great, did you know you were always an entrepreneur? Because I did. And I was like, no. And I think he had this gift of being able to see people's potential. Like, he always had a little glint in his eye, and he could see the potential before you even
Yeah.
knew you had
And
it.
the thing that he was, I think that was one of his superpowers. His other was he was a connector. So
Yes.
whatever you needed, and you didn't even know you needed, he knew a guy. Like, right?
Yes.
Like the Italians have a guy and the Jews have a guy. Like he was that Jewish version of it. He had a guy, and the guy was going to be, instead of in my old neighborhood, it was like someone who was going to beat someone up. Like Eli had a guy who like ran this company that could help you in ways you didn't know. So when I needed, I mean, I remember when I wanted to find an agent, he's like, you know what, let me look. And he gave me the person who became my agent. Um, when I wanted to submit it and find editors, he gave me friends who were editors. I mean, whatever you needed. And I remember I had eventually went back to law school. I wrote my first book. The book quickly got me 24 different rejection letters. In fact, that book still sits behind me on my shelf. It's never been published only by Kinko's. And Eli was like, at that point he had won, and he said, you know what? I'm going to do this thing called AmeriCorps. I want you to come be my speechwriter. And I was like, even though last time I went, he left, I was like, I'm going again, because wherever he goes, I feel better about myself, and he's going to help me find my potential. I remember he helped me and brought me in. Like I was one of the people who got to co-write the oath that, presidents have given for, 30 years now, 25 years. What are we, 30?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember
30.
that. I remember you writing the oath, actually.
And I've watched Bill Clinton give that oath. Like my words, I remember there was one day Eli came to me and he was like, and I was a kid, I was a child, and I was 25 years old, 24 years old, and he said to me, "We have a speech coming for the president. I want you to write my speech that the president's going to give. You're going to write the speech for the president." I was like, "The president of the United States you're talking about?" He's like, "Yep." So he's like, "Just you can do it." And I'm like, "I can't. I don't know if I could do that." He's like, "You can do it." I was like, "Okay, I can do it." He said I could do it, so I could do it. And I remember going and researching presidential speeches on this kind of subject matter and looking back at anything that's been said about national service. And I poured myself into this speech and looked over Clinton's best speeches, and I wrote all these things. And I gave it to Eli, and I gave it to actually Jody Cantor, who made some edits. She gave
Yep.
it to Eli. He made some edits, and it went to the White House. And back then, not far from where you sat, there was that fax machine that was right behind you. Remember where the fax machine was?
Oh, yes.
And
Yes,
Bill
yes.
Clinton's, the president, when he gave a speech, his speeches would come over the fax machine the next day, so you could see what the president's words were. And I was so excited because my words were basically intact. Like some edits were made here and there, but I'm like, what words came out of the president's mouth that I put in his mouth? And I picked up that fax the next day, and there wasn't a single noun, verb, adjective, anything that was mine. Nothing, not a
Well,
single word was mine.
I mean, Bill Clinton was renowned for like being in the back of the limo, heading up to the Capitol to give the State of the Union, and like changing the words that were going into the
Oh,
teleprompter. I mean, like it wasn't
spectacular.
just you, right? It was he
No,
did
I
they
didn't
did.
take it personally. I'm like, listen, whatever he said was better than my nonsense. But the point of it is he like gave me that shot, right? He
Yeah.
made me think you can, like, in fact, the first speech he ever asked me to do, the very first one was like on day one that I arrived, is he was offered to give the graduation speech at the University of Michigan Law School. He was giving the commencement address. And he said, I want you to read and help me with my commencement address. So I remember, I think Jody had actually written a first draft of it. And I remember, working on it. I can't possibly tell you if I added anything or just read it and said, great, I have no memory of it, but I know it was the first assignment. And I was like, the commencement address at the University of Michigan Law School. And the greatest part of the whole story for me is he trusted it again to a 25-year-old kid. And the best part to me was almost 30 years to the day that he gave that speech, I got asked to give the University of Michigan commencement address. And I got to go back to Ann Arbor and go in front of that class and tell them what this man, Eli Segal, who was a Michigan grad, did for me at the start of my career. And it is the only reason why I stand up here today. But it was that, you need that person who says, and I truly believe to this day, without him, I would not be, maybe I'd be talking to you and, as obviously as friends, but like, I don't think I'd be a writer. I don't think I'd be any of this stuff without Eli just saying, you can do it. I don't care. I don't care that you're in law school. You're an entrepreneur. I don't care what you do. You're a writer. He knew, he's like, I know you're a law student, but you're going to be my speechwriter. I'm like, I didn't even apply to be a speechwriter. I'm in law school. He's like, you can write, just do it. And I was like, okay.
That is such a great Eli story, and I'll tell you a very quick one because I want to talk more about you, but you'll like this story because it has to do with speech writing. He asked me to find AmeriCorps members to sit next to the First Lady during the State of the Union. That was talking all about AmeriCorps, and I think that was the beginning of my headhunting days because I basically had to scour 1,000, 5,000 AmeriCorps members and find the ones that were telegenic, that were, were articulate to talk to the press, that were had interesting stories. The noblesse oblige, get the kid who came out of poverty, the one who cares about environment. It had to be diverse in all the ways
The perfect one,
describe
right?
it. Right. And then I did it, and I wrote up their little stories, and I didn't do the speech writing, but that became part of the State of the Union. And I somehow thought I was going to get to go to the State of the Union because everyone gets a certain number of tickets.
Sure.
And I actually came to work that day wearing one of my mom's, hand-me-down suits because who could afford, your own clothes. And I come to the office wearing the suit, and somebody whose name I won't mention, but you can probably guess who it is, swoops in and,
I know
decides
exactly
in
who it
his
was.
Kennedy-esque way, right, that he to go instead, and
Of
just kind
course
of
he was.
pats me on the head as he swoops out of glides out of the office. And I was heartbroken. And Eli never said a word, never did anything. He didn't even really see it go down, but he always knew what was happening. And the next morning I come into the office at 7 a.m. and on my chair is the commemorative the program from the event, with a little post-it note that just says I heart you, in Eli's little,
Oh,
with
that's
a
awesome. That's
and he
great.
just left it for me, and we
He
never
knew.
spoke about it, but he knew, and that taught me how to be a leader. Just that experience of just seeing your people and understanding who they are and what they give of of themselves to the work, to the common cause. That was Eli.
Oh, also, listen, we all have that person in our lives who was the first person who ever told you were good at something, the first person to say yes. I had an English teacher who really was an influence on me, but, when it came to my adult professional life, it was Eli Segal. And I can tell you, I can't tell you how many book signings I've done over the years. I mean, a stupid amount, right? I've traveled the entire country. I've traveled the world. I've been to Italy. I've been to, England. I've spoken at the Supreme Court, all the nonsense, blah, 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 all of it's, whatever. The one that stands out beyond any of them. I mean, even when Christopher Reeve's daughter came to read Heroes for My Daughter with my daughter, it was Superman's daughter coming and reading with my daughter. I don't even think that matches up to, last time I saw him is I was in Brookline Booksmith, and I look up at, there's a little crowd in the basement down there, and I'd see you there and whatever. And, but basically the last person in the last row is this guy rubbing his hands. Yep. And waits the entire time. The whole place is empty, and all I want to do is I said it that night because I saw him in the audience, but I was like, the only reason I stood there was to have him come. And I remember going to his book signing and buying his books and doing the whole thing. But having your mentor, the one who gave you your first shot, come to your event. I don't care if I couldn't even tell you right now if there were 2 people there or 200 people there. I don't know, but there was one person there. Yeah. Amy Eli Segal was the greatest reward I'll ever have. I never get to tell that story. I never tell that story, but you appreciate what that means when that person that you just look up to so much is thinking of you and shows you that kindness.
It's absolutely incredible. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about the first book. So not the first book that you wrote that got 24 rejection letters, but I think somewhere along in the rejection letters, you learned how to write the next book, which would be the one that you would publish. And then that book was pretty successful. So how'd you figure it out between the Kinkos and the actual publisher?
So the first one I ever wrote was 800 pages long. 800 pages. That's a staggering amount of pages for a book.
The Count of Monte Cristo.
Right. And my wife threw away 300 pages, literally in the garbage. So narrowed it down to a lean 500 pages. And what I still believe to this day, the book got me my 23rd, 24 rejection letters. And to me, I think that I learned to write in those books. I remember I was actually working at AmeriCorps when I got my 23rd and 24th rejection letter. I remember getting the call And I said, if they don't like that book, I'm going to write another. And if they don't like that book, I'm going to write another. And it was because I was young and stupid. It wasn't because I was
Sure.
anything but. I was just stubborn and young and like, I'm going to do it. I don't care what anybody says. Screw you. But what I started the next book was something that it wasn't just starting from scratch. I was starting now 801 pages. I'd written 800 pages. And it's kind of like riding a bicycle. I think that writing it or doing anything in your life, whatever your thing is, it's like whether it's Malcolm Gladwell's how many, whether you want to say it's 10,000 hours, 100,000 hours, a million hours, pick your number, but the point is you got to put in the time. If you want to, I think everything in life is like riding a bicycle. I can tell you how to ride a bicycle. I can say, hold the handlebars and center your gravity and go 2 to 3 miles an hour. And you'll write all that down and you'll say, now I know how to ride a bicycle, but you never know how to ride a bicycle until you get on the bike and you pedal. That is the only way, no matter how many rules I give you, no matter how many laws I tell you to follow. And for me, that's what writing is that first book was me just pedaling and figuring out how to find the center of gravity and how to hold the handlebars. But I'll also say I finally had something to write about. Law school gave me that. Eli gave me that. Eli was the one who said to me, he said, go to law school. He said, and he was the one who pushed me to law school. He said, if you go to business school, you can do business. If you go to law school like me, you can do law and you can do business. And I was like, that seems smart. And Eli did that and it worked for him. But when I got to law school, I remember one of the first days I was daydreaming in the back and I wrote down, I learned about the Supreme Court, right? Here we are in RBG land. And I wrote down that the clerks of the Supreme Court are the ones who help decide the decisions and write the decisions. These like 26, 28-year-old kids. And I literally wrote down, Supreme Court clerk, and I circled it and I wrote book idea on top. And then I came to work at AmeriCorps. And that summer, I remember while I was at AmeriCorps, I wanted to know how the Supreme Court works. So I called up from the AmeriCorps offices, from Eli's offices, I called up the Supreme Court and I was like, hey, my name is Brad Meltzer. I'd love to come and see the court. And they're like, not letting me in. So I'm like, that did not work. So I called back from like different number, whatever room I was in. And I said, hi, I'm calling from AmeriCorps. And we have some interns who want to come down there. Can you show them around? And I called the marshal's office in charge of security. They're like, yeah, what are their names? I'm like, his name is Brad Meltzer. He'll be coming alone. And
Brilliant.
That's how I got into our nation's highest court, is using like AmeriCorps and, again, Eli's kindness to like, just let me push forward. But I don't think, Laura, to answer your question, honestly, those were easy and trite jokes, but like, I don't think I think I got lucky. Like we all have to have that break somewhere. And it takes one person to say yes when you write a book. For life, so many things, it takes one person to say yes sometimes. And our job in life is to find that person. And with this next book, we happened to find the person. The first book just didn't find him. I now was writing about something that was definitely a better subject matter. Certainly, I learned more. Certainly was a better book. But I also got lucky. And I got lucky with the launch, too, because Eli, again, back to Eli, was like, if you're going to have a book party, you have to have really good people host the party or no one's going to pay attention. And I was like, well, I don't know anybody in this town. I'm here for, And he's like, okay, well, I'll get you some people. So the host of my first party started with Eli and Phyllis Segal, with the first names on there. Thurgood Marshall Jr., who Eli introduced me to. It was, I think it was Marion Edelman he introduced me to. Every person that was on there, he introduced me to. And suddenly I had this big names, like Thurgood Marshall's son was hosting our book party thanks to Eli. And suddenly it became this huge party. And people came to it. And again, it wasn't me. I knew nobody in the city, but Eli knew everybody and gave me that shot. So again, I honestly that year could trace just about everything I did back to the kindness of this one man who would just open his Rolodex and be like, I got a guy who can host your book party.
I feel that way about so many things in life. Like I hear what you're saying about like sometimes you just get lucky, like something. But I think you get lucky when the opportunity arises that you've been doing all the work for. You just don't necessarily know that you're doing the work in a linear line to get to that thing. Sometimes it's like there's all this work that happens and you don't realize that actually the opportunity is over here because you think you're pursuing it over there. And then when the moment arises, you can walk through the door because you've already built the platform, that you're standing on. That was
right.
A
Well,
terrible
listen,
analogy,
it's kind of
but
like,
you know what I mean?
I think it's the Karate Kid, right? I mean, you put in all the time painting the car and waxing the floor, and then when the punch is thrown, you suddenly know how to do it. Now, it's not just luck. It can't just be, if it's just dumb luck, then anyone that scribbles paper can be like, well, someone said yes, you obviously got to write a book. But I firmly believe that there are better writers than me who never got a shot. I do not
Yeah.
think it's if it was just a meritocracy, the bestseller list would be filled with the best writers all the time, and it's not. Let's be very
Oh,
clear. It's filled with lots of
absolutely.
stuff, right? It's filled with like people who are famous and people who are connected and people who know someone, and someone's friend gets them on a big television show. Like it's all this nonsense, as in all things in life. It's a mix of obviously a lot of talent, but it's also a mix of a lot of things have to just go your way. And people say to me all the time, "How do you get a best-selling book?" And I'm like, "Okay, here's what you got to do. Sure, you got to write a book that hopefully is good. It has to have a good cover, has to have good marketing, has to have good sales, and it has to absolutely be released on a slow news week so you get good press. And the world has to kind of be quiet for a moment so everyone can just realize it's there. And that's all out of your control. It's like lightning in a bottle. It has to all strike at
Yes.
once. There's one name on the cover of every book, but only a fool thinks it's a one-person show.
That it is so well said. When my book, about a week after my book came out, I shared the stage with Robin Roberts, and she was handed the book by the MC, who I had been a good quote unquote good speaker for. In other words, like the event was running 7 minutes late, so I talked for 38 minutes instead of 45, and I was like, dude, you're back on track. Like I was just trying to be like a good soldier for him. And I got on that stage because somebody introduced me to the person who was running it. But they're all the things, they all get traced back to one person. But then Robin gets the book. This MC's like, you got to read this, and she reads it on the plane home, and then she tweets it out to like 5 million people and hands it to her senior producer, who, by the way, I'd been rejected by other producers at Good Morning America multiple times over, and says, book her. And suddenly I'm on the show, and I come home from that, and my younger son Pisher looks at me and he's like, mom, people wrote better books than you, right? I was like,
Listen, all of
hey,
us, all of
fuck
us.
you,
As
man.
my sister says, as my daughter says all the time, why does anyone want you to sign their book?
Right.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So
Right.
but that's the way it should be. We should never impress our children. But I do think, right, but you create that opportunity too, right? Like you have to get on that stage and be there for that reason. But yes, then the dominoes have to all fall your way and they go. But I actually think, and at least for me, this is just my personal thing. I think it's very important also to remember how you got there, because the moment you forget, you're finished. So
Yeah.
listen, we all have our kind of like our crazy rituals. Everyone has their own crazy rituals. We may not even think of them as rituals, but I will tell you that um, that this is my ritual. Here's my ritual for you: is when I got my 23rd and 24th rejection letter on that first book, the 22 rejections, the first 22 I knew were straight out rejections. We don't want it. But 23 and 24 were supposed to be yeses. My agent had told me, like, listen, these two people are interested. I actually went to New York. I met with them. I had these big meetings with them. It was like I was all impressed because I went to a real office and put on real clothes. And because I was a student at that point. And I came back and she said, there's going to be a bidding war and they're going to bid on your book. So go buy your phone, pre-cell phones, go buy your phone. And when you pick the phone up, I'm going to, you'll be there at a certain time, certain day. So I stand by the phone, and I'm at this point in law school debt and college debt. So I have all this debt to pay up. All I'm doing is hoping to pick up that phone and have my agent tell me, this is how you're going to get out of debt. You're finally going to have some cash in your pocket. And I'm waiting for her to give me the good news. And I pick the phone up and she says to me, I'll never forget, sorry, kiddo. And my heart just sinks. And I will tell you, Laura, that to this day, for 20 years now, ever since that's happened, every single day that I sit down to write, I replay that entire moment in my head. I replay the kind of phone I was holding, which was one of those clear see-through ones. The wires, you can see them running through
Yeah,
that. It
yeah,
seemed
yeah.
like high tech at the time. The Formica desk that was on my left from like the door store, or Crate and Barrel that like had the swivel lamp from college that everyone has. On my right is a bed with no, just a box spring and mattress, no headboard. There's a terrace that I'm looking over and looking at this fire station with 3 doors. I count the doors, 1, 2, 3, and I literally close my eyes and I say to myself, sorry, kiddo. And for 20 years now, every single day, I say it because I never ever want to think that I should forget where I came from. I never want to ever have less energy than when I was 24 years old. I never ever want to think I made it, because the moment I think I made it, I'm finished. And so for 20 years now, every single day I sit down to write, sorry, kiddo, sorry, kiddo, sorry, kiddo. And that drives me. That's rocket fuel for me.
So the book comes out and it's you climb up, you're number one New York Times best-selling author now. At a certain point, don't you look around and say, okay, you've got the sorry kiddo uh, that you do every single time, but also that there's this burden that you have, right? Like you put out this book and it's this great success. What's the second book going to be? How are you going to do that? How are you going
Oh
to top
yeah.
that? Do you need to top? Like, there's this moment we were saying before we started recording that the book smacks you in the face and you're like, wait, this thing has legs. This is bigger than I thought it was going to be. Now, what do I do? Because I thought that success looked like this, at this level, but really there's like another mountain range beyond this mountain range. There's even more. And what am I I'm actually hungry for that. I want that. You have this weight of the burden of your own potential that rests on your shoulders. How do you manage
Well,
that?
I don't know. I think I do think that your burden is only as big as your ego, right? Like
Yes.
that's your, right? So that first book, I think went to number 8 on the bestseller list. Okay. I didn't immediately go, well, we got to be number 1. I remember going, I didn't even know what the bestseller list was. There were no books in my house growing up. My parents, may they rest in peace, read 7 books. They were my 7. That's all they ever read. There were no books. So I didn't even know what the bestseller list was. I didn't know what the Today Show was until I was on it. I was like, is this a good show? I think it's a good show. I think it's, and they're like, it's a good show. Don't worry. That was my first interview. It was like they threw me right out there, but
That
I
was
didn't
my
stop
first
it.
interview at the Today Show.
And
That's
right. I mean,
amazing.
and I didn't stop and go like, well, I got to be number 1. I actually remember, again, it was a fax machine. The bestseller list came through the fax machine. And when the book came out, we had these like stunning reviews and, from Time Magazine to Vanity Fair to like USA Today, like just praising. I'll never forget week 1, the bestseller list comes out in a fax machine. I was in Florida at the time. And I turned to my wife and I said, let the backlash begin. And she said, what? This is great. I said,
Mm.
no, watch. And the next week, Entertainment Weekly gave me a D plus, not a B plus, a D plus, because
Ooh.
they're on the same book that everyone said was just the greatest. But now that it was on the bestseller list, it was just, in America, we love to build it up and then we got to take it down. And again, I firmly believe that just because your book gets great reviews doesn't mean you're great. And if they get bad reviews, it doesn't mean they're bad. I think, what you bring to it. But I will say, where I 100% agree with you, is it definitely had pressure for the next book. My next book it was the hardest book that I've ever had to write to this day. I struggled and fought. I remember the novelist David Baldacci, who's a dear friend. He'd been a mentor to me, and he'd taken me out to lunch. And I said to him, I'm just having so much trouble with this next book. And he said, and I was so panicked because I remember the thing that was struggling to me was I never cared about doing better. The thing that I was worried about was I was worried about losing it all. I was really worried about that. And I was worried about ever complaining that it was hard, because if I complained about it, then I was being thankless. And I thought, if I
Hmm.
complain, I'm like, someone's paying me to talk to imaginary people. And it went on the bestseller list and it all worked out. And if I complain about how hard this is, like, what kind of asshole am I? Like, that is just a
Yes.
terrible, terrible person would complain about something so
Yes.
amazing. And I told Baldacci all this, and he was so sweet about it. And he looked at me, I'll never forget. I can remember exactly where we were sitting, and he said, Brad, if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds so obvious, but a light bulb went off and it made me realize, like, it's okay to admit it's hard. It doesn't mean you're complaining. Like, it's just hard. And once he gave me the permission to acknowledge it was hard, like, that again was rocket fuel for me. I was like, oh, that's okay. I'm not being a spoiled, like thankless person, but it's hard. This stuff is hard. And so I will say, listen, then if you hit, when we hit number 1, there's definitely like your publisher wants you to hit number 1 again. There's no question. There's pressures that are built into this industry. But the truth is like when we've gotten them, I'm like, I just feel bad. It's not that I need mountains to conquer. I feel bad that I don't want to let people down. Like, I feel like the publisher put all this energy into it, and the marketing people, and these, publicity people, and all these people did all this stuff and called in these favors and got this thing and made a great cover, and I don't want to let them down. So that is what haunts me more than like, I got to get another number 1.
Yeah, yeah. I think the admitting that it's hard is something that a lot of us have trouble doing, because like you look around and it's like, is this really hard work? Like I get, like, again, you said, I get to talk to imaginary people all day. Like we're not out here digging ditches and, building
Right.
sewage systems. Like we're pretty lucky in the work we're doing. People ask me all the time, like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm fine. Like I could complain, but I'd be a real asshole. Like I just,
Right.
like,
Well, I
there's
always said that's
no,
my biggest problem in life, right? I'm like, what we do does not put calluses on your hands. I've had those jobs. Like, that's not this. I mean,
right.
I, but what I do take away from it is that to do that thing you want to do, is you got to admit what you love. It's the hardest thing to do in life, but you got to admit what you love. And when you do that, it opens you up to a really scary place. Because if you admit what you love, then if you don't get it, you're heartbroken. You've emotionally committed to something. But it's the only way, I firmly believe, that you ever get really what you're chasing in life, is you have to admit it.
So have there been things where you've like, I've admitted that I love this, I want to go for it, it's hard, and you haven't gotten them?
Yeah, I mean, on a daily basis, so of course. I mean, and again, whether it's, people like, why didn't they, get it? And the best part is people ask me publicly about them, right? They'll be like, why aren't any of your books in movies? I'm like, you think we're not trying? Like, or how come your shows on TV keep getting canceled? Like every show we've done has been canceled. We've made, I think, once to a season 2, and everything else we've only made a season 1. Like, where, like that is the way it goes sometimes. But I don't look at that and say like, well, boy, my life sucks. I'm like, you know what? That's icing on a great cake. I mean, and listen, sometimes we get great reviews and sometimes we get sucky reviews, and that's okay too. Like, I think at this, one thing I used to really struggle. We used to get some amazing reviews at the start, and then we would get some bad reviews. And again, that's okay. But I took it, it's worth looking at. If you put in "everyone hates Brad Meltzer" into Google, this video will come up that I did. And I collected all of my bad reviews. And I think you've seen it. I think I've sent it to you. Like,
I love it.
and it's just my kids and their little league team reading my most horrible lines from my worst reviews. It's my grandmother saying like, you got a D plus, you got to she's like, a B plus. I'm like, no, a D plus. She's like, well, then you better work for a B plus. And like, just horrible Entertainment Weekly ripping me, or New York Times ripping me, this one ripping me. And when I did that video, it sounds so dumb, but I felt like I finally grabbed that thing that my ego was holding so onto. Like, why is this place not giving me a good review? They gave me a good review on this. Why won't they give me another one? And I finally was like, I was so scared of what they said, so scared of what it was going to make me feel like. But once I embraced it and went through them and picked out the best, worst lines, I owned them. They didn't own them anymore. And so I've gotten reviews like, we did one of our TV shows, and the New York Times review said, this show, the opening line of the review opens with, "This show would be good if Brad Meltzer wasn't in it." Like, there's no more personal, more ruthless way to insult someone. And it was so clearly personal. But I remember reading that and being like, that's the way it goes. Like, I got enough nice things in life. I can take the beating. It's okay.
It's so hard. I mean, like when my book comes out, I get a bunch of 5-star reviews, and I get one that's a 1-star review that's like, this
Yeah,
book
but
is
that's
an
because you're an A-type
abomination. I can
personality. We do the
barely
same thing,
read
right?
it.
Like, you can have
Oh,
a 500 people that you're speaking to, 2,000 people in an audience that you're speaking
and
to.
you cling to the
But if you see
one.
one person who's sleeping, you focus on that one person. That you can get
Yes.
25-star reviews. You see one bad one. Someone said to me that a bad review is like your mother said it to you. You'll never forget the bad one. You can get, I can't even tell you my good reviews. I don't even know. I'm trying to think right now if I can quote a great review to you. I honestly can't. I can't even quote you.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I'm trying to think. There was one that was on the back of the 10th Justice. I remember they used all the time. It was like superbly something. I can't even remember what the next word was. Enthralling, entertaining. I don't even know. But I can quote you all the bad ones. I can tell you one by one. Like, worse than the pre-op jokes of an oral surgeon, someone said about me. Preposterous, sags under its own weight. Like, I know them all. But that's okay too. Like, to me, I actually think that that's why you have a drive to get better, is because that stuff hurts you and you want to get rid of it so bad, so you'll do. But I do think, I'll say it this way. I think in life, we all make the same mistakes over and over. And it's life's great joke to see if we ever learn from it. And most of the time we never learn from it. And the one thing I know about myself is that every mountain that I've ever tried to climb for ego, that by the time I get to the top of it, I very quickly realize, why did I care so much about this? And it made me realize it's not that I was picking these dumb things, It was just that my ego was picking the things I should be climbing. And it took me a long time to realize that, like, I can live without it being perfect in every way. I can live without, with having the 1 star here or there. I still remember all of them. They all still haunt me. Make no mistake. I never got any better at it, but I somehow hope I made a little better peace with it.
Well, I mean, it makes sense because if you don't want to let people down and you want to, deliver for them, if you get these reviews and you're letting people down, maybe you feel that way. But if you don't assign the success, you don't assign the achievement to the ego, right? You're not pursuing it for the ego, and you're pursuing it for them, right? You're doing it because you want to make it better for them. Then it does make sense that the things that you do that aren't directly attached to your ego, but that are in service of your audience, are the things that you actually do the best and you take the most fulfillment for. So that makes a ton of sense, and it's a super healthy way to be. And I hope I can get to that.
Listen,
So
I may sound like, oh, that was so enlightened of you. Like, I've been at this 20 years. I've written like 40 books, something like that. I mean, that wasn't book 2 for me. That was, book 37, where I'm finally like, why is, you gotta, again, life keeps giving you the same lessons. The question is, will you learn from them? And for me, I'm still learning. Make no mistake, I do not have the answers. Every bad review I get feels like my mother said it, just like I mentioned to you. But, at the end of the day, I think the way out of it is you have to realize, like, the only way you can accept that all the bad reviews don't mean you suck is you must also accept that all the good ones don't mean you're great. Those things must be corollaries to each other. And I think if you think otherwise and you think you're great and that's going to be the thing that feeds you, that's the pellet that's going to make you go forward on the hamster treadmill, you're screwed, because it's just that you're only going to be on that treadmill forever miserably.
yeah, absolutely. So I want to shift, and I want to talk about the children's books that you're doing, and I want to go into that by talking about your reading time with Barbara Bush, which
Oh
I
yeah, that
think
was ridiculous.
is maybe the funniest video that exists on the internet. Is you acting like Lucille Ball, and she's the straight man in this. I mean, she looks like she is so disinterested and so annoyed with everything you're doing,
So this
and
was
it's
the most absurd
hilarious.
thing. So that was probably one of the most absurd things I've ever done. We got to recreate the chocolate conveyor belt scene from I Love Lucy with First Lady Barbara Bush. And I had come to know her and the president because they, like Bill Clinton, they had read the novels. Like, that's how I actually met them. They just read the novels. Eli introduced me to Bill Clinton. He gave him my first novel. And so that's how I knew them. And we had done a book. I think I have it here somewhere. Lucille Ball. We did I Am Lucille Ball. It's not here somewhere. And I said, for literacy, we're like, why don't we recreate the chocolate conveyor belt scene? And I talked to her staff, and she was like, you know what, that's going to be great. We were doing an event for literacy together to raise money for literacy. And they do these great events that are nonpartisan events, like Democrats, Republicans come together, raise money for books and for kids to read and family literacy. And so I get in the car, the event's over, and Mrs. Bush and I are supposed to go back to her office. And she says, so Brad, what are we doing now? And I realized in that moment, either she's 90 years old and she's forgotten, or they haven't told her, but either way, she has no idea, and it's coming to me to tell her. And I'm like, well, I'm going to dress up in drag as Lucille Ball, and I'm going to eat all the chocolates in your office, and you're going to read the book and make fun of me. And she's like, okay. And the best part of it, when you watch the video, if you put in Barbara Bush and my name into the internet, is it is all in one take. I ate 1,000 chocolates in one take, and she is perfect. She is so pissed off, and she's just playing the perfect straight man. She is the perfect straight man. And you can hear, if you listen closely, her staff is laughing hysterically. They said, I don't think we've ever seen her do something that was funnier, because she just was rolling her eyes and looking at me like, you dumbass, like, what do you do? And it was the most surreal, amazing, wonderful thing that I've really been able to do for literacy in my life.
Well, we'll put it in the show notes for sure. My favorite is at the end of it. She's basically like, "So you're just like a nut, huh?"
Yeah,
Like,
and she ad-libbed everything. There was no script. I just did my thing, and everything she said was all her lines were all ad-libbed. Everything, even when because at one point I said, "So we're together. We're like Luther and Ethel. We're like Tina Fey and I forget.
Amy Poehler.
Oh, it was Amy Poehler, right? It was, thank you. I'm like, what did I? And like Amy Poehler. And I'm like, we're like Trump and Hillary, and she looks at me. She's like, jackass, And I'm like, it was so good. She was so good.
So it's part of a series, a children's book series. So why did you start writing? I mean, you're like doing your thing, you're writing these fiction books, you're doing the TV stuff, and then you shift to write stories about heroes.
Yeah, so you know what? Because I had kids, that was it. And you know, right? You have two that, I mean,
Yeah.
our kids were really young at one point. Now they're older, but I was tired of my kids looking at reality TV show stars and people who are famous for being famous and thinking that's a hero. What we do in America today is we confuse the word fame with the word hero. And I tell
Yes.
my kids all the time, you know, being famous is very different than being a hero. I don't want lessons of fame for my kids. I want lessons to teach them character, to teach them kindness, to teach them compassion, to teach them resilience. But I didn't know how to do it. And when I told my daughter, I was like, I'm going to teach you about Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart's amazing. She flew across the Atlantic Ocean. Isn't she great? My daughter was like, big deal, Dad. Everyone flies
Right.
across the Atlantic today. She didn't give a crap. She was not impressed. But when I told her this true story that when Amelia Earhart was 7 years old, she built a homemade roller coaster in her backyard. She took a wooden crate, she put roller skating wheels in the bottom of the crate. She shoves the crate to the roof of her tool shed. She comes flying down, flies through the air, crashes, gets up, says, that was amazing, whatever she yells. My daughter's like, Dad, tell me that story again. And suddenly Amelia Earhart isn't some black and white figure in a history book. Amelia Earhart's alive again. She's bold and she's daring and she's fun. And that's what we decided to do. We started with, these, you can see them behind me, like so subtly displayed. You can see Chris Eliopoulos, our amazing artist, draws them in this kind of cartoon style that's like Charlie Brown meets Calvin and Hobbes. And we did I Am Abraham Lincoln. We did I Am Rosa Parks. I Am Albert Einstein. My son loves sports. I'm like, forget a millionaire sports hero. Meet this guy, Jackie Robinson.
Yeah.
And we did Lucille Ball because I wanted my daughter to have a female entertainment hero who isn't just famous being thin and pretty. That Lucy stood for the idea it's not just okay to be different, it's spectacular to be different. We did Helen Keller. We put real braille into the book. So when she goes blind, it says, feel these dots? My name's Helen. This Helen. What's your name? And I watched my 18-year-old son with his eyes closed. And books are obviously for much smaller kids, like whatever, 4 to like 12 years old. And my 18-year-old was like eyes closed, feeling the braille in the book and was like, Dad, this one's actually good. I'm like, actually? Actually? But Laura, in all seriousness, this crazy thing happened as the 2016 election approached. As Hillary and Donald Trump were screaming at each other every night on television, two of our books started selling more than any others. And they were I Am Martin Luther King Jr. and I Am George Washington. And it wasn't even a Democrat or Republican thing. It was that parents and grandparents on both sides were tired of turning on the TV and seeing politicians when what they wanted to show their kids were leaders. And you and I both know there's a huge difference between a politician and a leader. And I love the fact that people now use our books to fight back against what they see in America today. They use our books on whether it's Jane Goodall or Jim Henson, or we did I Am Walt Disney, we did I Am Gandhi, I Am Sacagawea, the new one's coming out right now. We did Anne Frank and Ben Franklin. I mean, some vital lessons for where, look at Anne Frank right now, where anti-Semitism is at an all-time high in incidents from the last year, the highest increase they've seen in 40 years. And it's our way of fighting back. And it's our way of helping people build libraries of real heroes for their kids and their grandkids and their nieces and their nephews.
So who are your favorite? Well, let me ask you, how do you pick who you're going to do next?
Yeah. So I picked, in the beginning, those were the obvious choices, right? Amelia Earhart, Abraham Lincoln, Rosa Parks, Albert Einstein, Dr. King. There's some choices that are just, what you want, the biggest and the best you got. But the truth is, I pick where I think the country needs the help. I pick where I think my kids need the help. Anne Frank was 100% a response to where the culture is right now. I saw Muslims being targeted. I saw Jewish anti-Semitism at an all-time high. I saw people being targeted for race and where they were from and what religion they were on. I was like, how do you fight that? How do I give my kids that lesson? And Anne Frank became the obvious choice. I was like, we're going to do a book about the Holocaust for little kids. But I was like, the editor was like, and I'm like, yes, and it's going to be awesome. And it's the best reviewed book we've ever gotten. Again, not that reviews matter, but like, it's so fascinating that when we go completely out of our comfort zone, that's when the reviews, just went over the top and like, this book is, whatever. And, but that's how we pick. I did Ben Franklin because I was like, we drive our kids to be one thing and one thing only. You better be good at this. You better be. And Ben Franklin was amazing at everything, and ingenuity and creativity and the idea that you could evolve and make yourself better. And that's how you change the world. I was like, because all we do today is blame everybody. If anything is wrong, you did it. You're horrible. You're the thing. But Ben Franklin was like, that's not how you change the world. Change yourself. Change yourself. You change the world. Improve yourself. Improve the world.
Who's your favorite that you've done so far?
Who's my
I know that's like
favorite?
asking you to pick your favorite child,
No,
but
I know, but I think I Am Abraham Lincoln is just one of the best we've ever done. And not just because she's the newest, but it just is. Anne Frank may be the best book we ever did. You'll see when you get it. I mean, it's when she goes into the attic, the book actually shrinks. So there's black space at the top and the bottom, and instead of just being a full page book, it starts shrinking like a letterbox. And so you can feel the attic kind of, she's constricted and it's closing in around her. And you just really feel what a tiny space she's suddenly in as the whole page shrinks around her. And Chris, our amazing artist, Eliopoulos, he just made me look like a far better writer than I am by making the arts just incredible. And listen, we all want our kids off our phones, off their screens. The only way it happens, you got to give them something better to look at. And Chris's art is our secret weapon. Kids love it and they respond to it. And, we're blessed that they do.
how does the process of the book happen? Do you come up with the words first? Does he come up with the pictures? How does
Yeah,
how
so
does it
I
play
know
out?
I write it and I actually write what he should draw. I'm crazy. Like I'm super like I will tell him right down to the angle of like it's a worm's eye view looking up at Amelia Earhart, so the camera's looking up and the sky's above her and we're inspired because we see what she looks at and the sky is there and the sun's shining from the right. And I'll send him a picture sometimes if he can't see it. And thankfully, he knows exactly when to not listen to me and draw it his own way. Like, so
And he
I
speaks
put
Brad
it,
speak, so he knows what you're talking about.
he knows, he totally, like, yeah, listen, we're on, and I'm Anne Frank, or I'm Ben Frank was like our 22nd book together. So now we do a little bit better shorthand. He knows when you're like, you're just being so artsy fartsy. I'm going to do it my way. Stop talking.
Last question, who would you love to do if you could do anyone, regardless of whether or not it sells, of anyone, who would you love to write?
I mean, listen, I don't know. I don't know if anyone's going to buy I Am Anne Frank. So I think that's a perfect example. Like, I don't think there's anyone we've been afraid to do. Like, in the beginning, you're in the beginning of your careers, as you should be, you're careful. I mean, I remember my second book when I wanted to write it, I had this great idea for it. I was like, I want it to be this not a legal thriller, totally different about historical stuff. And my editor said to me, don't do that book. And I was like, what do you mean? That's what I want to write. And they said, don't do that book. We just spent all this money. We got you on bestseller list. Don't ruin your career by going out of the box. And I could have stood up for myself and told him I'm going to do what I believe in. But instead, in that moment, I totally caved. I completely caved. I did the book he wanted. It was the hardest book I ever wrote. It was, to me, the worst book I've ever written because I just wasn't following my heart. I was following what I thought was going to be safe because I didn't want to lose what I had. Book number 2, I didn't want to lose what I had. It was all ego. It was fear and ego. And I paid the price for it. And after that, I said, I will never, ever do that again. Never. And so when it comes to the kids' books, I have no fear. Like, we've done books, they're like, I don't know if the next generation even knows who Jim Henson is. They don't even know who he is. I'm like, they will now.
Yeah.
I don't care. Like, I don't care if the book about the Holocaust is might be intimidating. It won't be when we're done with it. It's going to be a book about hope, and they're going to love it. And so I don't have a fear for those books. I feel like that's the one. The kids' books are where, maybe in my adult books, I still definitely have fear of losing stuff, but the kids' books is the one place where I'm like, I don't care what the sales are. I do not care. Like, as long as they pay me to keep doing them, I want to keep doing them.
I love it. I love it. So, tell the people who are watching this now see that they can find you at Brad Meltzer on the socials. Where can everybody find you? Where can they find the books?
Yeah, so I'm at Brad Meltzer on every platform, from Facebook to Twitter to Instagram. You can go to bradmeltzer.com. You can go to ordinarypeoplechangetheworld.com. That's what the kids' books are called. And of course, anywhere from your independent bookstore, which we always, of course, they need a lot of help right now, to Amazon, to your local supermarket, you can find the books. So they should be there somewhere. If not, call me. We'll hand deliver.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. There were so many stories that we could have gotten to, like finding the 9/11 flag, or saving your history teacher by finding a kidney for her, or saving Superman's house. But thank you for spending the time talking to me about Eli stories in the beginning instead.
That's the best part. That I don't get to tell
super
anywhere.
meaningful.
So thank you for doing that.
All the rest we'll put in the show notes. People can go find them. Thank you for your time today. This was fantastic. And I am hoping to learn some lessons as I embark on book number 2.
Listen, I'm going to learn from you. You got the good lessons now. You're the one who knows lessons. Thank you for doing this. Love seeing you, old friend.
Love seeing you too. Bye bye.